wear my microphone because
Okay.
I'm not
You're not being seen. So
important.
oh, no,
you're
yes, you are.
important.
Wait a minute. You're important because you're doing this. It's your job. So it's very
Well,
important
I
to
will,
your institution, which is I'm honored.
Well, we are honored to have you here today. And I
Thank
want to
you.
thank you so much for making a trip also to do this. Today is Monday, October 15th, and the year is 2012. Now, I'm Laura Anderson. I work in the archives here at the Birmingham Civil Rights Institute, and we're really proud to have you, Barbara Cross, join us for this oral history interview.
Thank you. I'm honored to be here to share my history.
Thanks. Yeah, I'd like to just have a conversation. If you could tell me, before we forget this detail, to give me your full date of birth and place.
Sure. I'm Barbara Ann Cross. I was born on June 6, 1950 in Richmond, Virginia, which is Henrico County.
Tell me about your childhood and youth, if you will.
Growing up in Richmond, I remember being a happy little girl. I'm the oldest of 4 siblings, and I have a sister, Alma, who's 2 years younger than me. And then I have a sister, Onita Lynn Cross, we call her by her middle name, Lynn. And she's the baby girl. She was born in 1958. And my brother, Michael Juvon Cross, was born in 1957. Life for us in Virginia was real normal. We would always love to go visit my maternal grandmother who lived in a rural area of Kilmarnock, Virginia during the summer months. I remember being in the Girl Scouts in Birmingham and camping. In 1962, when I was 12 years old, I was excited about moving to a new city because I had never lived anywhere except for Richmond. My sister next to me, she had a problem because she had close friends and she didn't want to leave her friends. And my father was called to pastor the 16th Street Baptist Church. And we arrived in Birmingham, the summer of 1962. And I was excited about meeting new friends, going to a new school when the fall came. But little did I realize that Birmingham would be turned into a nightmare for us because I did not know about the demonstrations that were to come or about Dr. King.
Can you tell me what you remember about arrival in this city? And do you know what, if any, preconceived notions you had of Birmingham?
I had no preconceived notions because my father probably tried to shield us about the type of racial climate that was here. So all the thing I knew is that I wanted to meet new friends, come to a new environment, and I was excited. And we moved into a nice neighborhood. It was in what they call the Tennisville area. If you're familiar with 6th Avenue Baptist Church, it's in that community, Goldwire Way. And that was the church parsonage. The home across the street, which was the previous minister before my dad got there, was Reverend Beard, and they lived in that was the parsonage there next to the 16th Street Baptist Church, which is now office space. So the people at the church were so welcoming to us, my family. And most ministers back in those days, they fed the pastor and his family. So we had great church members. So I was happy so far as the neighborhood, meeting friends in the neighborhood, and school hadn't started yet. So my nightmare did not really start until the summer of 1963, but I was happy-go-lucky, like I said, based on our church family, the neighbors that I had developed new friendships in the neighborhood. But it was when the summer of 63 is when we were aware of a lot of the demonstrations. And after going to school and hearing things, it's amazing when I think about TV today and now. Most of the homes then only had about 1 or 2 TVs, and we really didn't watch the news that much. I remember reading the newspapers about nuclear weapons and the Bay of Cube missile crisis. And thinking about that, because in schools, we would have, instead of fire drills, we had to get in the hallway and put our head down between our legs because of the I don't know what kind of drill they call it, but it was like because of nuclear weapons. So, but it was the summer of 63 in September is when we were exposed to the violence that happened in Birmingham.
Before we get to that, can you tell me a little bit about your home life and what your parents were like?
Okay.
And
By my dad being a pastor, he was away at the church a lot doing preparing for his sermons on Sunday. And I had a close friend in the neighborhood, and actually went to college together later, but I used to like to play bid whist cards, and we had some other neighbors behind us. They used to have parties, what they call waistline parties. And whatever your waistline was, you paid to get into the garage. So we enjoyed that type of things. And I like going to the library on Saturday. We would buy these little fizzies and put it in water, and we would drink and read our books. And I was like happy as a lark. And also we enjoyed going back to visit our grandmother in the summer. So the summer of 63, we would go back to Virginia. But because of the hotels were segregated, we either had to drive a long way before we got to Kilmarnock, Virginia. We were afraid to go. I was afraid when my dad went through Mississippi, but I think he went to Mississippi when we visit my paternal grandmother. I didn't meet my grandmother on my father's side till I was 25. So I had my cousins to visit from Arkansas because we were always closer to my mom's side of the family because we lived in Virginia. So my dad would go visit his family, but I didn't meet her till we moved to Alabama. So that was interesting to become closer to my dad's side of the family, my cousins. So it was a new set of family. And my grandmother lived to be at least 102. And she died probably in the middle 90s. But my mother got a chance to visit us in the summer, or was it one Easter in 63? And we have a picture of her in the church, and that was before the church was bombed. But I have a lot of good memories prior to September the 15th, 1963.
now your father was from Arkansas?
Yeah, he was born in Haines, Arkansas. But how he got to Virginia, because he was in service, and then he went to school at Virginia Union. I don't know if it was college or university, but it's university now. In fact, that Atlanta alumni chapter is named after my father. But it's ironic, my mother has a twin brother. He's still living. My mother's deceased. And usually when you preach at a rural church, it's not many restaurants in the area. So my uncle, which is my mom's twin brother, invited him to dinner after the church service. And the rest is history. They said they were winking at each other across the dinner table, and they married, and we moved to Richmond. And my dad, we lived in Richmond. I was born in 1950, so I was there in Richmond from 1950 till I moved to Birmingham in 1962.
If you'll excuse me 1 second.
Okay. Will I be able to see what I did? I know I can't have a copy of it, but I will be able.
Have a copy of it?
I can have a copy of it.
Well, of course.
Oh, get out of here. Thank you. I know when my dad did. Are you familiar with the lady in Chicago that has
the History Makers? Mm-hmm.
He did that the year before he died at home. And I have not even looked at the DVD yet because I was there with him. But we used that picture, that suit he had on, the picture they had, we used that part of his obituary service.
Okay.
Is on his program. And it was so funny because my dad, a lot of things he couldn't remember. And I was there to kind of coax him. They said, let him talk about it. Because they asked him what his favorite food was. his favorite color, and I don't ever remember him having a favorite color, but I guess they wanted him to see him in his natural and whatever he could remember. Mm-hmm. And it was real interesting. They did it in the home, and that's the first time I had really seen a oral history presentation being done, and I was there to guide him and be there part of with him.
Well, of course, we might take for granted that your family's experience here in Birmingham maybe became so much a part of your family's story that you would have to live with it every day afterward. But I guess if you're ready to tell that story, we can do that.
I'm
I
ready.
love getting ideas about what life was like for your family before that happened.
Right.
Just what everyday life was like.
And it was normal. My younger sister stayed at home. My mom didn't work outside of the home, to my knowledge. I know before probably she married my dad, she was an educator. But I think she was a homemaker because he had several jobs before he got to Birmingham, because ministers back then probably didn't make much he was like a rural part of Richmond area. It's called Chesterfield County. And I was looking at what he had said before, that they wanted him to be full-time and do everything. He said, but I'm not getting full-time pay. I'm part-time. So back then they got part-time pay for full-time service, and he had to be, I think, to help a heart surgeon to do the pump and stuff like that. Well, here, this was his full-time job at 16th Street. So my mom might have been more of aware of things that were going on about the movement and my day-to-day activities when summer was just making friends in the neighborhood, active in youth programs in the church, because 16th Street, we used to go to, I think it's called Leeds, Alabama. So it was an amusement park. So I don't know whether it was just for blacks, but we had a good time when we went to Leeds, Alabama. So there was a lot of things that we were sheltered from. And so we felt happy prior to 63. So it was like, life is good for me. But my sister next to me, I think she was still mourning the friendship that she left behind. In fact, as a little girl, I remember hearing things. You know how we listen in on adult conversation, not sure what we're going to listen to. And I remember my mama said she has something growing in her stomach. And I was like, oh, she has a baby in her stomach? But then I found out she had developed an ulcer because she really didn't want to move. So she had to drink special water and stuff. But I was like, happy-go-lucky. So she was the one that eventually met a close friend in Birmingham. And it was the daughter of Reverend Nelson Smith. In fact, Ms. Smith just passed, I think, a couple of weeks ago. And his church was in our neighborhood. It was 6th Avenue on one side and New Pilgrim on the opposite end. But at the time we were living there, it was built in the neighborhood, I think, some years later after we left. And so Alma had a friendship and my brother had a neighbor friend. So we were happy kids because we did not know about the movement that was getting ready, things that were taking place that we were not aware of.
Can you tell me your first memory of discussion of the movement and maybe Monday night meetings?
That part I didn't know till later, but I was aware that we couldn't go to certain theaters in Birmingham that was segregated, but we could go to a movie. But I think it was maybe the spring of 1963 when Dr. King actually came to Birmingham. And I think looking at it on the news or hearing people talk about it in school. So it's ironic we were naive to that. You want me to fast forward to Birmingham that Sunday? Yeah, because basically I didn't know anything about that until after all this happened.
Yeah, sure. All you can do is tell your own story.
Okay.
That's what we want to know. I just wondered what your first
Okay.
memory was of hearing about the movie.
All I remember is that on that Sunday, September the 15th, 1963, or prior to that Sunday, we had practice because we were going to I always sang in the choir usher for the youth day. But that particular Sunday was the first Sunday that my dad had instituted as Youth Sunday so far as being on program. But we always had youth ushers, or we would sing in the choir, youth choir, and they had an orchestra. In fact, Mr. Jimmy Lowe, who was the orchestra, I think his son, after Mr. Lowe passed, his son directed the orchestra. But that day, it was exciting because we were going to be a part of the program. Actually, somebody was going to read the scripture or say a prayer or do an offertory prayer. And I'll never forget, my mother didn't go to church that Sunday. She was at home, but all of my siblings and my dad, so we would get to church probably a little before 9:30 because my dad probably had to open up. And I remember him saying he usually parks on the side of the church. Is that the 16th Street side? Yes. But that particular Sunday, he didn't park there. I don't forget where he said he parked. But I remember that lesson so vividly. We're talking about forgiving your enemies. And Mrs. Ella DeMann was my teacher. I was 13. And we had discussed, like, if somebody does something to you, whether steal your lunch or hit you, we're going to use the type of agape love that you forgive somebody who does something to you. So I remember we shared about different things that happened to us. Because back then, we didn't say kids bullied like they do today. We just knew they fought or they were treated you mean, but I don't remember the term bully until today. So after the lesson was discussed, there's a bell that rings for reassembly, probably about 10 o'clock. I do remember I used to play the piano at the church, but I don't think for Sunday school, but I don't think I started playing until I was like 15 because we stayed in Birmingham until 1968, 6 years. So I do remember I was getting ready to get up and go to the bathroom because my friend Addie had come by the classroom. And my teacher stopped me and gave me a clerical assignment. And my assignment, I remember she told me to write down the names of those who would be moving up in Sunday school, like we move up in grade school, fall of the year, excuse me, we move up in Sunday school. So I gave Addie my wallet and said, I'll see you in a little while. I remember getting back to the writing, and it seemed like it was just a short span of time before I saw her. And the most horrific noise I've ever heard in my life. And it seemed like the building was rocking off its foundation. And I remember something hit me in my head, and I started screaming. And it just seemed like everything went dark, and all you could hear was screams from the kids because the basement area is where all of the children's classes were. And I just remember people were screaming. It was like almost a stampede. And I was looking for my younger sister, and I never did see her. And I remember one of my church members, Mr. Hill, he was trying to, because I guess he knew my dad was the pastor, and he had to see what was going on. And I found the sister next to me and my brother, but we still couldn't find my baby sister. She was 4. So Mr. Hill took us out the front of the church, which is the 6th Avenue side. And he was trying to keep us from going to the side of the building because I didn't realize that's where all the policemen were and that's where all the devastation was. So I remembered, I said, we can't find my sister. He said, well, we're going to take you home. So it was Alma and my brother Michael. And my mom was waiting at the door because back then they didn't have call waiting. We lived approximately 20, well, in the Tennisville area, which is Goldwire, where Elmwood Cemetery is. Would you think that's about 25 miles from the church? Or 25 miles from the church, or maybe 10 or 15 miles?
No. It's not anywhere near that.
Okay. Well, my mother heard the noise in our neighborhood, and she said immediately, because she knew, and she said, "Where is Lynn? We can't find Lynn." And later we found out, some hours later, that she had gone to the hospital with the other 20-some injuries. And when my dad came home some hours later, but all we knew was the phone kept ringing and ringing. And we didn't have call waiting then. And it was news reporters calling in. My mom put me on the phone, and I talked to one reporter, and I just told him what I remember experiencing. And then her brother, her twin brother, made an emergency call because my mom's family and my dad's family, they saw the interruption, and they were trying to hope my grandmother didn't hear it so she'd have a heart attack. All they heard says, "The program has been interrupted because the 16th Street Baptist Church was bombed." And I don't think they heard about the deaths immediately, but when they did hear about 4 girls were killed, my uncle, my brother, we kind of laughed about it later. He said, he probably said some curse words to the operator. He said, "My sister and her family in trouble. A church has been bombed, and I want to be sure everybody's okay." So they put an emergency call through. Lord, can I get a tissue? Okay. I think I have something in here.
Can go get some.
Let's see. I got it. Okay. Thank you. So they interrupted the broadcast, and the operator got him through, and he heard we couldn't tell him about my sister because we didn't know. We just said, Mama said, "Alma's here, Barbara's here, Michael. We don't know where Lynn is." And then when my dad came home, he had her, but I guess it was hours later. But how I found out my friends had died, Laura, he had the program, the original program, and on the back, let's say maybe this was 6:00 when he got home. I don't know, 5:00 time. It was like, didn't mean anything to me back then. It had deaths. It had my friend Addie's name on there, 14, the funeral home she was at. It had Cynthia's name on there, Carol, and Denise. And I was overwhelmed, so the phone kept ringing. It looked like it never stopped ringing. So we stayed. So when my younger sister came home, we were so glad to see her. And my mother found out later that when the doctors saw all these people coming in with blood, and then the sheets pulled with the sheets covered over the gurneys, like, where are all these people coming from? And they said the doctor broke down and cried because my sister, he asked her how old she was. She just did that, and blood was streaming on her clothes. But thank God she wasn't severely injured. So we were happy to see her. But when I saw the word deaths, I lost it. And I had probably forgotten I had given Addie my purse. And that's the first time I had ever lost a friend. And we spent the night over a neighbor's house. And I do remember going to school the next day. And the elementary teacher, they knew my father. And they said, "Are you going to be okay?" And I think we were glad to go to school to get away from all of the chaos. And I'll never forget, though, the next day is probably when I got out of school. I'll never forget this as long as I live. The doorbell rang, and I answered the door. And it was Dr. King, Martin Luther King, his brother A.D. Williams King, and Dick Gregory was one other minister. Let's see, Ralph Abernathy. And I'll never forget because they had those doors that opened like this back in the day. And I remember I shook his hand, and people always said, "Did you say anything to him?" I said, "Well, I knew it was too sad to say anything to him. I know he came for business to see my dad." And then I realized they were going to go pay tribute, visit the families of the girls. I do remember my dad visiting, I think it was that before they got there or either another day, Mrs. McNair. And I'll never forget this as long as I live because that was her only child. And she was at her mother's home and she was sitting like she was in a state of shock. And she was at Miss Pippin's, her mother's home. And they were trying to get her to eat. And I remember hugging her. I didn't know what to say. And I know my dad was paying his visiting the families. I just remember going over the McNairs, her mother's house, and it was like she was in a daze. I remember they had two separate funerals. I went to Carol's that Tuesday. It seemed like that was so soon. And then the next one, that Wednesday, the three, I remember, I think my dad took me, but I was like in a room, like not on the main floor, but it was just throngs of people. And I just remember looking like I was in a daze of all these people, and I couldn't be near my friend's casket. I learned later that Denise had a viewing, but no one else had a viewing. And I found that out through the Spike Lee documentary. But it was like, I remember Miss McNair fainting at the cemetery. Now, that part I don't remember because we couldn't go to, there were two different cemeteries, so I couldn't remember it. But I remember going to Denise's burial, and I don't know how my dad did that. You know how some things are vague in your mind? That part, but I know that Cynthia, Denise, and Addie had the same um, funeral. And that was the saddest day of my life. The bombing, saying goodbye, not really saying goodbye to my friends. It's just, I can almost see why Miss Robinson didn't want to have a mass funeral because it was just like, it was just so many people. But I guess people wanted to say goodbye to four beautiful girls. Did life turn back to normal? Not for me, because the sound of that day still reverberated in my mind for about 10 years. And when I went off to college, I said, well, I'm not going to talk about it. I'm going to forget it. I'm going to put it behind me. About 2 or 3 days, a week after the bombing, there was a loud noise in our home. My heart started beating fast, and I remember shooting out the house like a rocket, only to discover that nobody in my house followed me outside. Then I found out later my sister had fallen out of bed. So that's how nervous I was. My heart was pounding. Also, I had a neighbor across the street that worked in a nightclub, and he had a walkie-talkie. I can't remember, was that before the church bombing or after the bombing? And he said he heard say, "Get that nigga crossed next." So I think it was before the bombing because Birmingham was really, that was after but it might have been before Dr. King's I Have a Dream speech. And anybody that was associated with Dr. King, like A.D. Williams King, his brother's home was bombed. The A.G. Gaston Hotel was bombed. And then I started noticing about a little before the bombing, they had Dynamite Hill where they found dynamite on the streets. So I lived in fear in Birmingham because of Not that my dad told me, but we learned from the neighbors. They were out front of the house with rifles. And so my mom always said they think the reason they didn't bomb our home is because we lived on a dead end street. And it would have been hard for them to throw the dynamite or plant the dynamite with all our neighbors in there. We did realize we had an informant, black guy who was an informant in our neighborhood who lived across the street. And they were saying that he informed a lot of the people about the activities of my dad and Dr. King with the church. And he was an alcoholic. This is hearing adults say so things. So my father would never tell me that, but I believe it because when you start reading articles, there were people who informed and got paid to infiltrate where Dr. King would be. And I always believe because my father later understood, because my father allowed Dr. King to use the church, or anybody associated with Dr. King later learned that's why we would be in harm's way. I'll never forget, though, some years later, I heard my dad do an interview in our church in Birmingham, in Atlanta, because he had a stroke, and that was when they reopened the investigation of 2001 and 2002 for, I forgot the guy's name, but into Bobby Frank Cherry in 2002. I testified in that trial. And in 2001, I don't know why I can't ever call that man's name, but Thomas Blanton.
It was Blanton. Okay, yeah. I'm
Okay.
sorry.
Well, he blamed himself for the bombing. And he was giving them all the information about, because he had testified from the grand jury. And one of my neighbors brought my dad over to Birmingham for that. So I told him after the interview, Dad, I love you, and you were courageous to let Dr. King use the church, because if not your church, any church would have been bombed. Dr. King tried to make a difference, and you were courageous. So Birmingham, I know it's supposed to have been integrated the spring of 64, the downtown district. I know we could try on clothes and go there, but it's just that at the time that the church was bombed after Dr. King's speech, I would have never thought that would happen. And I guess I thought everything was kind of settled in Birmingham. But I think the Ku Klux Klan is what I read. They were angry because the schools were going to be integrated. So I don't know why they chose to bomb the church. I believe it was because Dr. King and my dad allowed him to use the church. When you look back at the trials, they said they didn't know anybody was going to be in there, but they have the sign out there, knew that. So I did go to that trial 14 years later, living in Atlanta. I was upset that it took so long. I don't hate the bombers, because I believe if you're taught racism and superior race, you're taught hatred. I wasn't taught hatred. I didn't grow up in that type of environment. I really feel sorry for them because they didn't get a chance to know Cynthia Wesley, to know Annie, to know Carol or their family. They weren't out in the street throwing rocks or cursing nobody out. They were in a place of safety. One of my favorite sayings, which is on that plaque in the church, it say, and that was put there before they even know who did that bombing. It says, may men learn to replace bitterness and hatred with love and understanding. So my message is what we learned that Sunday about a love that forgives. I wasn't taught to hate. I did want to trip up Robert Chambliss in the courtroom when I saw him in the hallway, because he seemed like he was so happy. I wish I could have asked him. I don't think back then I would have been that bold to ask him, because he always said he didn't do it. Why would you plant dynamite on a church knowing that kids would be there? I wish I knew. When I went to the 2001 trial, came back here for that, Thomas Blanton. What infuriated me was they could walk through the courts, no shackles. I think when they convicted him, that he had to walk out with the handcuffs. And then with Bobby Frank Cherry, he looked like a little old, older deacon man who lived his life. And I testified in that one because a lot of the older people were gone. So the best thing that I think that came out of the bomb, and if I had to look for a glimmer of light and a rainbow that is in that window over there, is that in 1964, I like to think that Lyndon Baines Johnson signed the Civil Rights Bill that we could go to public accommodations like the hotels and anywhere we wanted to go if we have money to spend. It was a start. And I like to think not only those other two little boys that got killed that Sunday are Cynthia, Denise, Addie, or Carol, and that document they show over there, I think they're angels of change. So that gives me hope that one day people can sit down and have differences, whether you're Black or white, Hispanic, non-denomination, gay, lesbian, whatever, that we can agree to disagree, that we might not like you, but when you act on your hate to take out a life, I hope that they remember what happened over there and see those beautiful pictures on the inside that they can rethink. And so sometimes we can't explain what make people do things. And they said people who hurt people hurt people. So I don't know whether they were hurt. I wish I could get into their minds. I don't know. But I have no hate for them. But I miss my friends. But I like to think they're angels of change. If I have to get something to smile about, that they're no longer here to suffer the injustices of this world. But they were their death was a catalyst to make a change in the civil rights movement. That's what I like to see it as. When we left here in '68, my dad was called uh, to Alabama State University, where he worked in, I think, the Baptist Student Union and taught sociology. And then when he went to Atlanta in '72, it was interesting. He was called to be an associate minister of a church, and they had a Canadian pastor. It was a transitional area where the whites had moved out, but this particular pastor and the church, those who remained in the church, that we're not going to leave this community. Someone asked my dad once, I asked me, your dad left the movement. And I said that this at his homegoing service. He opened up the doors. He was not marching the streets. But God called him into a reconciliation type ministry. And I think what happened in that church, he was trying to work with pastors of all colors, all denominations. And he got this award in Atlanta called the Fred Patterson Award because of his activism in the community among Blacks and whites. And what better person than that would happen to a person who church was bombed, he had no animosity, but to bring churches together. And I said that in his homegoing. And I told him about this hymn that described my dad's life. In Christ there is no east or west, in him no south or north, but one great fellowship of love throughout this whole wide world. join hands, dear brother of the faith, whatever your race may be, who serves the something, da da da. But it describes my father. And so when they told me that, I'm like, he didn't leave the movement. And then I thought about, well, all of us are called some different drummers. His was working with churches of interfaith of different colors to whatever that difference is. And I think that was more of a healing ministry. There are some people who can march the streets. There's some people in the suites making a difference. But his was in the churches with the different denominations. And I thank God that I got a chance to see my dad do that. And there were articles written about him. He got calls to preach at different churches of different races because of what he went through over there. Now, when I went to college in '68, I went to Tuskegee. I did not talk about the bombing. It was like, yeah, I'm getting away from Alabama. I don't want to remember that. And it was only if people knew who my dad was, they wanted to talk about it. And I started having headaches in Tuskegee, and I had squashed the memory. And then only to find out I was having anxiety attacks because I had never really gotten over the bomb, and I was still hearing noises. And my hands were shaking. When people asked me why I trembled, I just said, I'm nervous. So I had squashed all the memories, and it was like, I'm free. I'm in college. I can do this, do this, do this. Forget bomb in hell. And I'll never forget when somebody had me do a presentation at our church academy. I think it was in the 90s. And I thought I was ready to talk about it. I broke down like it was yesterday because I had forgotten it. I didn't want to talk about it. So now I still cry. It is 50 years almost. I don't know why I still cry. But I guess that day was so painful. And I used to apologize for my tears, and somebody said, no, they need to still see it hurts. Now look at the church. I don't know. But I must remember, I said, like the Jews keep the Holocaust alive, I have to keep the memory of my girls, my friends alive, because they're no longer here. And when I'm working with the SCLC women, when we do voter registration, and we did this on Auburn Avenue, it's a large street festival in Atlanta, we register people to vote. We can't tell them who to vote for because that's a nonprofit organization. And one lady told me she doesn't vote. And she's a black lady. And I said, can I ask you? Well, she said, don't vote. I said, can I give you some reasons why you should vote? And she said, she listened to me. She looked like she might have been 50 years old or 40. It was hard to tell. I said, vote for Dr. King. His voice is silence. Mega Evers. And I started calling the roll. I said, I'm a survivor of a terroristic attack. I said, I didn't say that when I was growing up, but as somebody interviewed me in Atlanta and said, I witnessed the terror. I didn't think of it like that. I said, I lost 4 beautiful friends. They were in a place of safety. Vote for Annie Mae Collins, who was 14. Vote for Cynthia Wesley, 14. Her voice was silenced. Vote for Denise McNair, only child, who was 11. And Carol Robinson, 14. Annie Mae Collins. And she said, she listened. She said, I'll think about it. But I try to remind people why they should vote. Because in 1965, that they signed the Voter Rights Bill. Your voice is your vote. There were people whose lives were taken because they didn't want them to have the rights or freedom to vote or go into certain places because of hatred. You have that voice. And so I'm constantly getting a chance to speak to groups about my experience. When I took care of my dad, and when my mom died suddenly in 2003, because we knew, can I just go and get another tissue? Okay. I don't know what happened more in there.
We can stop this if you need to for a while.
Okay, I just need to get another tissue. Okay, thank you.
No, we don't have to stop for that one. And if you need me to go get you some, I will. She goes in the whole box.
Because you know you will have a crybaby here. Okay. Okay. Thank you. When I was taking care of my dad in 2000, and he died in 2007, there was a call in 2006 from Clemson University. And this lady, black lady, she left a message. She wanted to speak to my dad, and I called her back, and she wanted him to speak. And I said, "I'm his daughter, Barbara, my dad's caregiver. He had a stroke, and when my mom died, I moved in to be his caregiver in 2004." And she said, "Well," I said, "but I do speaking engagements." So she said, "Can you send me your bio?" I said, "Sure." I was a survivor. I was in the church that day. So she asked me how much to charge. I told her. She said, "We can do way better than that." But she gave me a nice amount. They came pick me up. But the Alphas put on since Dr. King was an Alpha fraternity, this was the 25th anniversary of the holiday celebration. And the theme was live the dream, be the dream, 25 years of excellence. And I went through the ABCs of the movement and talked about the experience in Birmingham, about the life of Dr. King, how I met him, and his drum major instinct. But I keep the memory of my friends alive, and I'm sure I cried there too. When Spike Lee did the documentary, that was really an honor. We got a call in Atlanta in the late 1990s, and I wanted to meet Spike Lee, so I said, "Dad," because I think we had taken my father's car keys from him, and I said, "I'll drive you down to the King Center." So I shared with him what I shared with you, and he said, "Do you want to be in the documentary with your dad?" I said, "I would feel honored to." So we had lunch with him. He had his film crew, because I thought he was just going to be interviewing. I didn't know he was actually going to be rolling tape. And, some parts they cut out. But when he put the piece together, and I came to Atlanta for the premiere, was at, I think, one of the movie theaters downtown, and they had a reception at the High Museum. But when I saw the documentary in its entirety, I cried, because I didn't know I was going to see the morgue scenes. And I looked at it again last night. I try to make myself sometimes look at it to go back over in my mind, be reminded of those pictures that I never forget. But I'm glad he showed the morgue scenes, because he had to show what 4 little girls looked like, their life prior to September the 15th. And then the morgue scene to show the severity of what hatred looks like. So I'm glad he did that. It was hard to look at, but he had to show the reality of it. And just like when men go to war, sometimes I think Bush didn't want to show the caskets coming back, but we have to be reminded.
Same thing.
It right. And I met Miss Teal down around that used to say that when I came over one of the tours. She was with John Lewis's group, and I come over here every year with Miss Lowry's group. And she was in a wheelchair, and I didn't know it was her. Somebody said, "That's Emmett Till's mother." And I went up to her, because she was at the corner where that signage is, the church. And somebody was taking her picture. And I said, "Ms. Till, I'm Barbara Cross. I am so honored to meet you. This was the church my father pastored at the time of the bombing of Reverend John Cross's daughter, Barbara." And her daughter took a picture. I wish I had that picture. And I said, "Thank you for what you did by letting the world see what hatred did to your son. You were courageous." And it's still shown out there. I said, because sometimes we try to cover up hatred. But when you see it in the raw and what it looks like, hopefully someone will get the message I don't want this to happen to my child. I don't want it to happen this to my sister and brother. So I really did. And that does remind you what Spike Lee did there. He had to show with his camera what 4 beautiful girls look like when they came out to church. So I've been blessed to really share messages as a substitute teacher for DeKalb County because I retired Bell South to take care of my dad. I'm so glad I did that. I was a mama's girl, so my dad, I got a chance to get closer to him to take care of him because I don't know what it was like for my dad to go through that rubble. And in many interviews, he said he has nightmares. I cry because I remember him saying in an interview or somewhere else that when he started going through that rubble, they said, "Oh, Reverend Cross, don't go through there." They said, because a lot of times when dynamite goes off, they said one charge to make everybody come out. And then they said another charge that when you're out there, you think it's safe, and it goes off again. He said, "Oh, no." He said, "My children under here, I guess all these kids under here, I got to be sure everybody's okay." And he heard somebody saying, Addie. Addie was Sarah. And that was the only survivor over there. And he said when he got a few feet under, it's like they were all blown on top of each other. And he never did describe that to us. It's just what I heard. I wouldn't dare ask him, but I heard him tell somebody in an interview he still has nightmares. And I told you I heard him say that he blamed himself. And I said, "Oh, no, Daddy." And I kissed him. I said, "You were courageous." So Birmingham, even though I know they're trying to change the image with the Birmingham Pledge, because I came back in one year and accepted an award from my dad from the Birmingham Pledge. Jim Roch, does he still have that? Okay. That's the only thing I can see, maybe because I don't live here, the positive spin they're trying to put, no place for hatred. And I think because of what happened over there, they're trying to change that image. But someone once said, I don't know what was Dr. King, that you can pass laws, but you can't legislate people's hearts. So hopefully, I know a lot of people are always coming over to the church. I just hope that people will remember that even that day that church became their tomb, that I'd like to think it was a catalyst for change, for people's hearts becoming changed and realize that it's something about a death of a child or innocence that will change a person's heart before an older Black man or older Black woman. Because people can relate to children, innocence. I don't think it would have been a change if it had been men or women. I don't think so. I think hearts would change because they were little babies. Their life hadn't begun.
Can you tell me if you remember, or if you remember your father talking about the weeks and months after this happened? You mentioned that the phone just was ringing off the hook at home. What was it like at the church?
What happened? They couldn't meet anymore at the church because they had an architect to come in. And I remember we would meet at Dr. A.G. Gaston's. He had several funeral homes, but we used his business college auditorium at no charge. I found that out later. And my dad they said they had several donations from all around the world. And that winter, I remembered, I think that was the summer we visited my maternal grandmother in rural Virginia, that Mr. Pitts, I forgot what his last name is, that designed the window. He came and talked with my dad, and that's how he got ideas to do the window. And it's supposed to be represented. I remember my dad telling me playing it, and I remember the dedication of that window was on my birthday, June 6, 1965. And we still have that program. But it's supposed to represent a Black man suffering on a cross like Jesus, with one hand like this saying, "Stop the violence," and this other hand reaching out for forgiveness and love. And then there's some little dots, like little lines that look like little minus signs going all the way across, like the middle. And that's supposed to be like the black man being crucified with the dots in his side, like the black man in the South. And at the bottom, it is a beautiful rainbow over top the black man's head. And it's supposed to be like a better day is going to come. A sunshine will come from all of this pain. And at the bottom of the window is a plaque or the little part of the ceiling, I don't know what you call, like a little shelf like of the window, but on the bottom, not on the window, but away from the window, that has a memory of and the girl's name. And if the sun is hitting that window, I don't know whether you've seen it on the inside, it's just beautiful. It's just like, wow. But if it's dark at night, you can't see the beauty of that window. And I think it was shipped here in panels, but he talked with my dad for that summer. So it was dedicated in 65. So they must have shipped it the early part of 65, but I know they dedicated it in 65, June the 6th, because I have that program. But we met at LR Hall Auditorium that was generously donated. But my parents, I'll never forget when my father would go on speaking. I learned this through articles I've seen sometime later, because a lot of that he didn't tell us. He might have told my mom, but he didn't tell us. He would go and receive donations on behalf of the church and speak. But one that was really, I remember my mom talking about this one, where Mrs. McNair went, my dad and my mom. I can't remember what Mr. McNair went. And it has them on the plane there. I don't know whether they're leaving California, but my mother said the picture on the plaque that she has, that there was an artist that gave her an oil painting, and I'm sure that's in the studio. Their studio. It used to be in the house, probably his studio. And they said it wasn't a dry eye in the place. And that was I'm almost thinking that was the same year of the bombing of 64, because she didn't have her other two kids until 2 years after the bombing. She has Kimberly and Lisa. And I always say they her miracle babies. But my mother said it wasn't a dry eye in the place. And Denise was a beautiful girl, inside and out. And she was happy-go-lucky, I remember that. And she said it wasn't a dry eye. But I remember that my parents, still got calls. Now, what my dad did say this, and it angered me, and I know it angered him. They said when they started investigating the bombing, they would ask my dad, and they know he didn't bomb the church, do you have any friends or enemies when you left Virginia that would have bombed your church? I was like, yeah. And I was angry. I know my dad was angry, but they know that. But that angered me. He said he got those kind of questions that investigated him. Get real. I do remember, like I said, the trials. I was given a pen, and I have it, by the FBI. Let me show it to you. I think I put it in here. I came to a symposium over here, must have been in 2004 at Birmingham Southern College. Look what it says. For my role testifying in the trial, justice for the little girls. And it has the emblem and the insignia, FBI insignia. I have 4 of them. I said, why they give me 4? I said, well, maybe because it was 4 little girls that killed. But I try not to put it on because I don't want to lose it. And I'll always keep this. On this side, it says 015. They only had about 200 of them, I think, made. And I'll cherish this for the rest of my life. In fact, I want to be buried with that on me. Justice for the little girls. And that was given me by one of the FBI directors at the symposium. And that particular, I'll never forget, John Lewis spoke. He had just came out with his book, Walking with the Wind. And the Mr. McNair was on the program. I can't remember when Ms. McNair was there. They had from the 4 different trials. They had from the 16th Street Baptist Church bombing, another guy who was firebombed. His home was firebombed for the NAACP. His name is on that memorial marker. I can't I can't remember his name. Also, Merle Lee Evers was there. These were old trials, and it was called, what was the name of the symposium? Civil Rights Justice Remembered, or it was something about the old trials. I can't remember the exact name, but it was a beautiful symposium talking about hate crimes and how now a lot of the older hate crimes were becoming solved. So I remember that. And I think I did tell you I was at the dedication of the memorial marker in 1989. And there was the whole street that was closed off facing the Southern Poverty Law Center. Rosa Parks was there. Each family name that's on that memorial marker, most of them lost their life by the hand of the Ku Klux Klan. Except for Rosa Parks' name was on there because of the difference she made with the Montgomery bus boycott. So they had a dinner, and they had I can't remember where that was in Montgomery, but that day, that Sunday, that whole street was closed out. And each family name that was on there, they paid our way. They paid for the hotel, and it was just awesome. But it was so many names on there that I had never heard of before. But we had represented the family of Annie Mae Collins. I remembered Ms. McNair being there, Shirley Wesley, who was adopted by the Wesleys after Cynthia died. And she cries in that documentary. You remember seeing her cry? Okay, I'm surprised I didn't cry on there. I probably was just looking all everywhere. I can't believe I didn't cry. Unless he didn't get me crying, because a lot of that you'd say and they cut parts of it out. But when Spike Lee said this, and this kind of sums it up, it's something about that raw emotion that overcomes those who talk about that you never get over it.
How could it not?
My sisters, they won't talk about it. My brother either.
Well, I wanted to ask about them.
They don't talk about it. Even the one who got cut in the head, they don't want to remember. The one next to me, when I was on Oprah's show, she's...
Needs more. You need this back.
I don't think I have any more in there, Laura. I'm sorry. Was talking about my sisters. Michael, all I remembered, and I don't know what this is the type of effect he has. He used to always say when he got to be a teenager that he never wanted to work for a white person. And that's what he said. My younger sister, she doesn't talk about it. She did an article in one of the church papers about, because most people don't hear about her, and she doesn't probably remember at 4, I don't know. The sister next to me, she became militant. But she said it wasn't the church bombing that made her militant. When we moved to Montgomery, I wasn't here. Whatever school she integrated, it might have been in Birmingham. It was Ramsey High, so it was here. Because I changed to go to Ramsey my last year at Auburn, and I went my senior year at Ramsey. She said they had a sign that said nigger crossing, and the teachers didn't do anything and let them have the sign. And so at cafeteria time, they would space out all over. No, they had to sit together. So one time they were angry about the nigger crossing sign. Oh, they used to put thumbtacks in the students' seats, so they were mad about that. So they said one day we'll fix them. One black sat at every table, and the teachers tried to make them move. They said, we're not stopping them from sitting with us. And she said that what outraged her is because the staff and the administrators were behind the white kids, and they were the enemies. So they So when they got settled, when I went over there, it was okay. But that's what she experienced, and that's what she said. It wasn't just a church bombing, but about the sign that said "nigger crossing," and they didn't stop the kids. So that's where she was irate, and that made her bitter.
So she was one of the students who integrated Ramsey.
She was one of the ones. Very smart. She was 2 years younger than me. Because I went over there in 67 to 68, and I graduated from Ramsey. I was in the choral, and I was in the drama. And I'll never forget my English teacher. I got an A+. She was real sweet. But I had no problems with him. I loved it, but I guess she had to go through the integration process and was treated like that. So that's what she, but they toughed it out.
Now, how did your family come to decide to be part of that as well?
My family?
Yeah,
I think probably because it was a good opportunity for my sister to go there. So I'm sure my father encouraged her to do that. Emma was very smart. She was like very studious. Like I like to look at TV all night. She would be ready to go with the wind. And she's still smart to this day. I always said I'd graduate. Thank you, Lottie. And I was interested in creative writing. I wanted to be a journalist, but my freshman year of college, I didn't want to go to the University of Alabama and experience the hatred. So my neighbor went to Tuskegee, and I visited her at Tuskegee, fell in love with the campus. So I was English major, liberal arts, and took journalism courses. So I always knew I wanted to be a writer, a journalist. I asked enough questions to be, but I just didn't pursue it. My first job when I graduated was with the telephone company. So I said, I'm in communications, but a different type of way. So, but I did go take a course at Georgia State for journalism. But yeah, my sister experienced that. But like I said, my brother doesn't talk about it. They say he's bipolar or schizophrenic, and we didn't know whether the bombing had anything to do with why he said he didn't want to work for any white person. He's now living in New York. He's bipolar, major depressive, but they say it's more of a chemical imbalance, nothing to do that we know of from the church bombing. But I'm sure that has some influence in being 5 years old to not understand and be in a place, because I know it affects me with crying. But the siblings, they don't talk about it. So I don't know whether it's painful or, but I will tell people in a minute after the fact of college, because when I went to college, I shut down. I didn't want to talk about it. But after people start asking me to do things in the 90s, they knew my dad, and if he couldn't speak anymore, they wanted me to. So I had to refine my voice and share the story. So I keep it alive and keep my dad's memory alive because I think it's important.
Today it's difficult to even imagine that you all went to school the next day.
Mm-hmm. But I guess it's kind of like our parents wanted to have us some sense of normalcy, because at home, everything was bombarded by the telephone, making arrangements for funerals. And like I said, I answered the door that Monday, but I didn't go to school the Tuesday and Wednesday. I went to the service. I'm sure my other sisters and brothers, they went to school. Mm. I'm glad I did go to the service. It was a little closure. I just didn't say goodbye to them because I didn't view them. But after seeing the documentary, I knew I couldn't view Anna or the other three. And I didn't know about the viewing of Denise. I probably wouldn't want to have gone to the viewing. We talked about the window and the 3 trials. And I was so glad to get guilty verdicts for those 3 men. I just hate that the time frame took so long. But justice was finally done. And somebody once said that justice delayed is not justice denied. I think Rob, the guy that U.S. Attorney General, Doug Jones, yes. He came to my father's homegoing service. Him and the Sidney Sheldon. Sidney was the one. I didn't know that they had people to, I guess, what they could see if my dad could stand trial. I forgot what they called them. But they can test the witness and be sure that they could be coherent. And it's ironic because my father had another stroke. My parents, my mother and my siblings did not want me to take my dad to the second trial, the third one. I said, no, Mom, I will be with him and he can do this. That morning, my dad, I knocked on his door. He did not answer. He was roaming the hall. He hadn't had his medication. I said, oh my God. So I got room service to bring him breakfast up, got him dressed, got his medications, and one of the person picked us up at the hotel and took us to the trial. Only thing, I couldn't be out there because I was going to testify, and my dad was in the room. But we came immediately after he testified in my testimony. I'm trying to think, somebody take us up there. Yeah, we came back to Atlanta. But I was worried. I said, oh my God, I hope my dad doesn't have another stroke up here. So they were kind, I think, with the questions, but he had to probably look at pictures. And so I was so happy. And so when we didn't know about the verdict of that one till I think it was a couple of days, but we were back in Atlanta. With the Thomas Blanton, I think that verdict came, or with Chambliss, that verdict came, I don't know, well, that was the next day, but I think we stayed in Birmingham. I can't remember. But I was glad of all three of the verdicts. My father did receive a call that somebody wanted to do a deathbed confession, but he said he didn't have to meet him at the church, that he could just go to the church and kneel. But then the attorney said that it was a lie. But I believe that when a person gets ready to leave the world and when anything they've done, they were ready to make a confession. I believe that. So they always said that fourth person, if I'm not mistaken, was Herman Cash. But it always amazed me that these people want to be like FBI informants to get off for what they did. So it's just, but I guess they give up one person to get the other person. So I'm just glad that it's not going to bring the girls back, but at least they can get some type of pay for some part of their life for what they did.
You know, people come here from all over the world every day.
Wow.
And they're on a pilgrimage. And like I said, I know that your family had to live with what happened here every day. You live every day with what happened here. And I had a question and it left me. But I wonder how you feel about the fact, if you were aware of it, that people do come here seeking something, seeking to just stand in that church and stand on what they will call sacred ground. And they'll refer to the girls as martyrs. How that makes you feel now?
I guess I feel honored that people want to still go there, to stand in that place, and maybe kind of when they see that angels of change, kind to reflect that many decades ago what it was like to see the German Shepherd dogs and the fire hose, and if they watch Eyes on the Prize, because somebody used to ask us, did that really happen? I said, yes. Those bull connor, that existed in the Kelly Ingram Park. It's just amazing historically with this Civil Rights Institute right in front of the church and with those statues at Kelly Ingram Park, they really get a sense of what it was like, even though they go through those monuments with the jail cells where kids actually filled up the jail because parents were afraid to lose their job, or they see that vicious, gaping mouth of that dog with those teeth that people were actually, they stick those dogs on kids and adults if they could. I'm honored that they want to feel just being there and just taking it all in, especially to see the those signs out there. And I learned that when I Googled last year about the church, that they had the side and new monument on the side, because that day was my first time seeing it, because we didn't have time to see it when we came on a tour because our bus was in an accident. So I had them to open up the church but couldn't go really. I went through the front door and just gave them a hug. But they said that is one of the most questions that I asked is, where was the dynamite planted? Mm-hmm. And today I saw like a rose, a flower on each name, and then I guess a flower wreath that had turned over. It makes me feel good that people still come. And even when we come and see busloads there. And one time I'll never forget, because I talk to people a lot. And when I'm talking to our group, it was some other guys that were there. There were 2 Black guys, handsome guys. And I said, if you want to hear my history, I was here. That was my dad. And he wrote me, he worked for Glory Food Company. He sent me a whole basket and he wrote a note and it said, thank you for sharing your history. Because I could feel through your story the impact of the bombing. So I'm glad I did that. One time I was upset when I came over here because John Lewis had a group and they had a Secret Service there. So naturally they don't have to be sure that the church is protected. And he said, you can't come in. And I told him, this was my father's church. This is like coming home for me. And I understand, I respect what you're doing, but I have a group too. And this is I don't know whether they let me in or not. I can't remember, but I did say as much. I said, I was here the day of the bomb. I'm John Cross, my father. But I understand he had to do what he did, but I had to let him know who I was. I'm not trying to do any harm, but I understand your job too. That was all the time I got kind of a little ticked off, but I got over it. But I'm glad you shared that with me, because sometimes I don't see who comes over there. But it's so good to know that people care and they still visit that. And I respect the minister there, because I guess it's hard because you realize people want to make it a museum. It's not a museum. It's an active church. But people do remember it. I'm honored that people remember it. I'm honored to do this interview because a lot of times we get calls at my dad's house. I have had the home phone disconnected. I just use my cell. Or people writing, they want me to, and I don't get a chance to write back to everybody.
Yeah, I was going to ask about that. Even now, are you constantly approached?
I like speaking engagement, but one thing was the best thing I think I ever did. It was a little girl from Oregon, white. I didn't know what color she was, but she left a message on my dad's answering machine. This happened to be about probably a couple of years after he had died. And it said, hi, my name is, whatever her name was. It was the mother calling. She said, my daughter wants to interview Reverend Cross for a project she's doing in her school in Oregon. So I called back. I said, hi, this is Barbara Cross. I'm the daughter of Reverend John Cross, and my father is deceased. And I said she could interview me. And she probably was not more than probably 10 or 11. So it's interesting. When adults get interviews, they get it mixed up. So she had me coming out the bathroom at the time of the bombing, and I survived, which was okay. But it was interesting. The guy who was a writer for this newspaper in Oregon, he sent me the copy of the article. It was Reflections from a Violent Past. And his name, he's a writer for Oregon, Bob Welch. And he sent me a box of chocolates and his book that is a combination of a lot of his articles in the paper. And he said to Barbara, thanks for taking the time to share your history and welcoming us in the process. And I was so honored that I called that little girl. So I'm glad I called her back. And now I started thinking about calling him and saying, well, I want you to overwhelm me and help me get my book written. But I might still do that. He has a writing place in Oregon that's overlooking a lake. I think it's outside of Portland. But I thought that was so sweet. So it's little things like that. And a lot of time people at my church, they know kids doing projects. They want to interview me. But what I tell them, I say, you're going to have to, and a lot of them, they don't do it. I said, you need to tell me what you're writing. I want to see what you're writing. A lot of times they won't do it, but they'll thank me. But I thought that was awesome. And the words may not have been exactly like that, but he said, thanks for taking the time to answer a little girl and welcoming us in the process. So I'm going to share my history, no matter how painful. Because I tell you, even kids at school, when I'm not here, I want you to tell my story. And a lot of times when they see me crying, they ask me some awesome questions. They said, Miss Cross, why did you give Addie your wallet? I said, that's a good question. This is a girl thing. If your teacher sends you to the cafeteria, to the office and your class is going to school, boys don't do this, but girls say, here's my wallet, here's my book, save me a seat. And they say, well, Miss Cross, did Addie have any parting words for you? This really got me. I know I'm on camera and I'm going to say it. I'm going to be truthful.
We're running out of tape.
Okay. So Sarah says, I didn't see Addie that day. When I testified, she always calls me on this. And this is what I say. I didn't say it to her because I don't like to upset her. You cannot know every step your sister makes because you were in the bathroom. I did not give my wallet to Denise. I didn't know. Denise was in my sister's class. I was not that close to Carol Robinson or Cynthia Wesley. I gave it to Addie. And so they said that. I said, she was telling me goodbye. And I didn't realize because her family said I didn't see her. And I was like, wow. I got a chance to give her my wallet and didn't realize I was saying goodbye to her. So kids ask a lot of profound questions that make me think.
I'm sure they do.
So.
We can get a new tape, or we can say,
whatever you want.
It is done. And
whatever
it is your decision.
Whatever you want me to answer, I will answer. If you think this is, could you think of an area that you wanted to cover?